There is a unique and quiet language spoken within the walls of a shared home, a language of routine and ritual that requires no spoken words. It is the language of a coffee cup placed just so on the kitchen counter, the familiar sound of a key turning in the lock at precisely the same time each evening, the comfortable weight of a shared silence. For many years, this was the language Ginger Franklin and her husband Jack had spoken fluently. It was a language that had built a life, a family, a future. But languages, like people, can change. Sometimes, the change is gradual, a slow drift in dialect, a new word introduced here and there. Other times, it is a sudden and jarring shift, as if a foreign tongue has invaded the sanctity of a native speech, leaving one person fluent and the other utterly lost, unable to comprehend the new grammar of their own life. For Ginger, the shift began not with a thunderous argument, but with a series of subtle, almost imperceptible whispers of change, whispers that would soon grow into a deafening roar. It started with the laundry. For 6 years, laundry had been a predictable landscape of soft cotton boxers and work shirts smelling faintly of the shipping office. Then, one Tuesday, nestled amongst the familiar fabrics, was something new, a pair of silk briefs, stark and alien. Ginger held them in her hands, the material cool and foreign against her skin. It was a small thing, a trivial thing, perhaps. Men change their preferences, she told herself. But it was a thread, and once pulled, it began to unravel something much larger. Soon after, a new scent began to cling to Jack's clothes when he came home, a cologne she had never smelled before, sharp and expensive. He had never been a man for colognes. He was a man of soap and water, of simple, clean scents that she had come to associate with safety and home. This new fragrance was a mask, an invisible barrier he wore between their world and another, secret one. The changes were not confined to his wardrobe. They crept into his very being. Jack, a man who had harbored a lifelong, almost comical fear of the dentist, suddenly became obsessed with his oral hygiene. For years, she had practically dragged him to his annual checkups. Now, he was scheduling appointments on his own, appointments he insisted she did not need to attend. He would return from these visits not with the usual grimace of discomfort, but with a strange, almost giddy energy. When she questioned him, gently at first, about this newfound passion for his teeth, a defensive wall would spring up. His voice would sharpen, his eyes would avoid hers. He claimed it was about health, about finally taking care of himself. But Ginger felt a chill settle deep within her. It wasn't about health, it was a cover story, an alibi meticulously constructed for a life she was not a part of. His work schedule, once as predictable as the rising sun, became erratic. Late nights at the office became the norm, explained away by system crashes and urgent deadlines. The calls to say he would be late grew more frequent, his tone more distant, the excuses more elaborate. The easy rhythm of their life together was gone, replaced by a jagged, unpredictable beat of uncertainty and suspicion. Doubt is a corrosive acid. It eats away at the foundations of trust, leaving behind a hollowed-out structure of anxiety and fear. Ginger found herself living within this structure, questioning her own sanity. Was she overreacting? Was she a jealous, paranoid wife, inventing betrayals where there were none? She would look at her son, Jackson, a perfect blend of her and the man she thought she knew, and a wave of guilt would wash over her. For his sake, she wanted to believe. She wanted to dismiss the silk briefs and the expensive cologne and the secret dentist appointments as mere midlife eccentricities. She loved Jack. She loved him with a depth that made the very thought of his betrayal a physical pain, a sharp ache in her chest. But love could not blind her to the growing mountain of evidence. And a stronger instinct, the instinct of a mother determined to protect her child from a world built on lies, began to take hold. She would not raise her son to believe that deception was an acceptable form of love. She would not stand by and watch her family disintegrate into a quiet tragedy of unanswered questions. She needed the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. It is a moment of profound surrender when one admits that the truth of their own life has become inaccessible, a locked room for which they no longer hold the key. For Ginger Franklin, that moment came on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, the phone feeling heavy and cold in her hand. With a trembling voice, she made the call that would change everything. She reached out to a group of professionals, detectives who specialized in navigating the shadowed landscapes of infidelity. She was outsourcing her own intuition, hiring strangers to uncover the secrets that were poisoning her home from the inside out. In doing so, she was exercising her right to know, a right that every committed partner holds dear. An investigation was launched, a silent, watchful eye cast upon the life of Mr. Jack Franklin, age 38, a shipping manager, a father, a husband, and a man now formally accused of relegating his marriage to the forgotten cargo of a life headed in a new, clandestine direction. The quiet whispers of doubt were about to be answered. The question was no longer if Jack was hiding something, but what, and with whom. The surveillance began, and with it, the slow, methodical dismantling of a 6-year lie. The cameras were rolling, and the truth, in all its painful clarity, was waiting just beyond the horizon, ready to be brought into the light. The world of surveillance is one of patience and persistence. It is a world of long hours spent in parked cars, of coffee growing cold in paper cups, of watching and waiting for a single telling moment that can illuminate years of darkness. For the investigators assigned to Ginger Franklin's case, the first few days were a study in routine. They documented Jack's predictable journey from his suburban home to the sprawling warehouse where he worked as a shipping manager. They watched him direct forklifts and sign manifests, a man seemingly immersed in the mundane details of his professional life. It was a portrait of normalcy, a life so ordinary it almost felt deceptive in its simplicity. But the detectives knew that the most profound betrayals are often hidden behind the most unremarkable facades. They held their positions, their cameras ready, waiting for the mask of routine to slip. And then, on the 4th day of the investigation, it happened. The rhythm broke. As the afternoon sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the industrial park, Jack Franklin emerged from his workplace. But instead of turning his car toward home, toward Ginger and Jackson, he steered it in the opposite direction. He drove through the city's arteries, a man with a purpose, his destination a tidy, unassuming brick building in a quiet professional complex. A sign out front read Westwood Dental Arts. The investigators set up their perimeter, their long lenses focusing on the entrance. A short time later, Jack reappeared. He was not alone. Walking beside him was a woman. She was blonde, dressed in the pale blue scrubs of a dental professional. She was not his dentist. The way she walked beside him, the easy familiarity in her posture, the way her laughter carried on the afternoon air, all spoke of a connection that went far beyond patient and provider. They stopped at Jack's car, and the woman leaned against the passenger door, lighting a cigarette with a casual grace. Jack, meanwhile, fumbled through his center console, searching for something. The woman, this unknown blonde, watched him with an amused, affectionate expression. The scene was intimate, a small, private moment played out in a public parking lot. He finally produced a compact disc and, with a triumphant smile, slid it into the car's stereo. She extinguished her cigarette and climbed into the passenger seat beside him. The investigators, their microphones aimed at the vehicle, could not hear the exact melody, but the rhythm and the bass line that pulsed through the closed windows suggested something soft, something romantic. And then, the visual confirmation rendered the music irrelevant. Inside the car, bathed in the soft glow of the dashboard lights, Jack leaned across the console. He kissed her. It was not a brief, friendly peck on the cheek. It was a deep, lingering kiss, a kiss of familiarity and passion, a kiss that spoke of a shared history and a secret present. After a few moments, she pulled away, her hand lingering on his cheek. She got out of the car, but the farewell was not yet complete. She leaned back down into the driver's side window, giving him one more kiss before turning to walk back into the dental office. Just before she disappeared through the door, she turned and with a final, theatrical flourish, blew him a kiss goodbye. The investigators had their first piece of concrete evidence. The unknown woman in the dental scrubs was not a figment of Ginger's imagination. She was real, and her name, as they would soon learn, was Misty. The pattern, once established, began to repeat itself with an almost sickening regularity. 5 days later, on the 9th day of the investigation, the sequence of events was nearly identical. Jack left work and drove directly to the dentist's office. This time, however, the rendezvous was different. Misty emerged from the building not in her scrubs, but in street clothes. She got into her own vehicle, and Jack followed her, a 2-car procession moving through the evening traffic. Their destination was a dimly lit local bar called the Cypress Tap. The investigators followed them inside, taking a discreet position where they could document the unfolding scene. The pair chose an innocuous booth in the corner, sliding in close to one another. The pretense of a professional relationship was gone entirely. Here, in the anonymity of the crowded bar, their affection was on full display. They laughed, they touched, their hands frequently finding each other across the small table. They drank their drinks quickly, as if the bar were merely a prelude to the main event. And it was. After less than an hour, they left the bar and drove in their separate cars, back to the one place that served as the hub of their secret life, the parking lot of the dental office. It was late now, the lot empty and dark. Under the lonely glow of a single security light, Jack's goodnight kiss transformed into an intense, prolonged makeout session. They leaned against her car, a frantic, desperate embrace that seemed to defy the cold night air. Finally, she was the one to pull away, but he clung to her hand, his expression one of a man who did not want to let go. The bond was eventually broken, and Jack was forced to return to his other life, to the home where his wife and son were waiting, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded in a deserted parking lot miles away. The evidence was mounting, painting a portrait not of a fleeting mistake, but of a calculated, ongoing affair. Each clandestine meeting, each stolen kiss, was another layer of betrayal, another crack in the foundation of Ginger's marriage. The investigation was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. On the 11th day of the investigation, the surveillance took on a new and perplexing dimension. The affair, which had thus far been characterized by a straightforward, albeit clandestine, passion, now revealed a layer of psychological complexity that was both confusing and deeply unsettling. The evening began as the previous encounters had. Jack Franklin concluded his workday, his departure from the shipping facility a familiar sight to the investigators. His route was unchanged, a direct line to the Westwood Dental Arts office, the epicenter of his secret life. As before, Misty emerged to meet him, and they left in their separate vehicles, a now practiced choreography of deceit. Their destination, once again, was a local bar, though a different one this time, a place with darker corners and a more transient clientele. But it was inside this establishment that the script of their affair deviated into uncharted territory. Upon entering, they did not seek a private booth or a secluded table together. Instead, a strange and deliberate distance was placed between them. Misty walked to the bar and took a seat, ordering a drink as if she were completely alone. Jack, after a moment's hesitation, drifted toward the other side of the room, feigning interest in a jukebox that was not even playing. He slid coins into the machine, making selections with a detached air, all the while his eyes would dart across the room, settling on her for a fleeting moment before looking away. To any casual observer, they were two strangers, their paths crossing by chance in an anonymous bar on a weeknight. But to the trained eyes of the investigators, this was not a chance encounter. It was a performance, a bizarre and unsettling piece of theater for an audience of one, each other. For nearly an hour this strange charade continued. She nursed her drink, occasionally chatting with the bartender, a picture of relaxed independence. He lingered by the jukebox, then moved to a small table, always maintaining that calculated distance. The investigators documented every stolen glance, every subtle shift in posture that betrayed the connection they were so theatrically trying to deny. What was the purpose of this game? Was it a power play, a test of wills, or was it something else, a shared fiction they inhabited to heighten the thrill of their illicit connection? The tension in the room, at least between the two of them, was palpable. It was a silent, charged energy that crackled in the space between them. Finally, Misty seemed to decide that the first act of their play was over. She finished her drink, slid off the bar stool, and walked directly toward the exit. As she passed Jack's table, she did not look at him, but her path brought her close enough for her to whisper something into his ear, a message too quiet for the investigators' microphones to capture. Then, she was gone. Jack waited, a study in forced patience. He counted to 60, a full minute before he put some cash on the table and followed her out into the cool night air. The investigators were already in position, their cameras focused on the poorly lit parking lot where the second act was about to unfold. He found her leaning against her car, bathed in the orange glow of a distant street lamp. He approached her quickly, his earlier feigned indifference replaced by an urgent, almost desperate need. He pinned her against the car with his body and gave her a crushing kiss. But then, the script twisted once more. After the initial embrace, she pushed him away. It was not a gentle push. It was a firm, definitive shove that created a clear space between them. Her expression was unreadable in the dim light. She pulled him close again, but not for a kiss. She spoke to him in a low, intense whisper, her words again lost to the distance. He stood motionless, listening to her. When she was finished, she stepped back, her arms crossed, as if waiting for him to restart the scene, to play his part correctly this time. And he did. His approach was different now. The desperation was gone, replaced by a cold, aggressive demeanor. He grabbed her arm, his movements rough and deliberate. He worked her off the hood of the car, his body language speaking of a dark and unsettling form of dominance. He opened the passenger door of her vehicle and, with a hand pressed firmly on her lower back, seemingly forced her into the seat. It was a disturbing scene, teetering on the edge of something far more sinister than a simple lover's quarrel. As he got into the driver's seat and sped away from the parking lot, the investigators were left with a chilling new piece of the puzzle. This affair was not just about sex or emotional connection, it was about a dangerous and manipulative game, a script that only Jack and Misty truly understood. It was during this deeply unsettling rendezvous that the full measure of Jack's duplicity was captured in a recorded phone call to his wife. While Jack was living out this dark fantasy, Ginger was at her mother's side, a world away emotionally and physically. She was at a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup for her aging mother, a simple act of familial duty. Believing her husband to be working late to support their family, she called him. The conversation, when juxtaposed with the reality of his actions, was a portrait of breathtaking cruelty. He answered, his voice a perfect imitation of a weary but loving husband. Ginger's voice was warm, unsuspecting. "Good," she replied. "I was just calling to see how your day was going." Jack's lie was immediate and effortless. "Well, I was just about to call you," he said, the sound of his car's engine a dull hum in the background. "We've had a system crash here at work, and it's a bad deal. I'm not going to be able to pick up Jackson this afternoon." The disappointment in Ginger's voice was audible, a subtle drop in tone. "Jack," she said, a hint of frustration creeping in. "I told you about this last week. I'm at the doctor with my mom. I can't leave." Jack's response was a masterclass in manipulation. He shifted the blame, casting himself as the overworked victim and her as the unreasonable one. "Well, Ginger, I can't leave either," he snapped, his voice feigning the stress of his fabricated work emergency. "This is my job. I can't do everything. I can't work and pick him up." "You figure it out." "Okay, Ginger, you figure it out." The line went quiet for a moment before Ginger's defeated reply. "Okay, Jack," she said softly. "I will figure it out." He hung up, the call ending as abruptly as it began. He had successfully navigated the intrusion from his real life, clearing the path to continue his night with Misty, leaving his wife to clean up the logistical mess created by his lies. The investigators now had a complete picture. A man who could seamlessly transition from a dark, aggressive role-play with his mistress to a cold, manipulative conversation with his wife. With this mountain of evidence now compiled, the purpose of the surveillance shifted. The goal was no longer to determine if Jack Franklin was cheating, but to document the full scope of his betrayal in a way that would be undeniable. The team of private investigators returned to their headquarters. The process of preparing the dossier for Ginger's examination began. It was a somber, methodical task. Photographs were printed, each one a frozen moment of deceit. The first kiss in the car, the intimate conversation in the bar, the disturbing and aggressive encounter in the parking lot. Video clips were edited into a coherent timeline, a visual narrative of the affair. The recorded phone call was transcribed, Jack's callous words now stark and permanent on the printed page. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of a 6-year marriage. The final report was a heavy thing, not just in its physical weight, but in the emotional burden it represented. It was a chronicle of lies, a detailed map of a secret life. The investigators knew that presenting this dossier to Ginger would be like handing her a bomb. They were about to detonate the life she had so carefully built, and the fallout would be immense. But it was a necessary detonation. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be brought to light. The stage was now set for the next phase of the operation, the reveal. Ginger Franklin was about to come face to face with the man her husband had become, and her world would never be the same. The time for surveillance was over. The time for confrontation was about to begin. The only remaining question was how she would react when the full, unvarnished truth was laid bare before her. The moment a client is shown, the evidence is the most delicate and volatile phase of any infidelity investigation. It is the moment when suspicion, a heavy but intangible ghost, solidifies into cold, hard, and irrefutable fact. It is a moment of violent transformation where the world as a person knows it is irrevocably shattered. The investigators prepared the viewing room with a practiced, somber efficiency. It was a neutral space, designed to be calming, but there is no decor that can truly soften the blow of profound betrayal. When Ginger Franklin arrived, the anxiety was written on her face. She was pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had spent weeks living in a fog of doubt, and now she was about to find out if her worst fears were the truth. She was a woman on the precipice, and Clark, the lead operative, understood the gravity of the moment. He greeted her not with the detached air of a detective, but with a quiet, human compassion. "How are you doing today, Ginger?" he asked, his voice gentle. Her response was a whisper, heavy with exhaustion. "Well, I've had better days." Clark nodded, foregoing any further small talk. It was time. "We conducted 3 weeks of surveillance outside of his workplace and outside of his home," he began, his tone professional, yet empathetic. "We have compiled the findings. Are you ready to see them?" Ginger took a deep, shuddering breath, a silent battle raging within her. Part of her wanted to run, to leave this room and return to the painful but familiar comfort of her uncertainty. But the stronger part, the part that had made the call in the first place, knew she had to see it through. "I guess I have to," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of resolve. "Yeah, I need to. I need to, yes." With her consent given, Clark turned to the monitor, and the secret life of Jack Franklin began to play out in high-definition color. The first clip was from day 4. The footage was clear, the camera work steady. "Okay," Clark narrated, his voice a calm anchor in the impending storm. "On this day of surveillance, we are outside of Jack's work. It looks like he drives to the dentist office, walks inside, and a short time later appears with that female. The camera zoomed in on Misty, her blonde hair and blue scrubs now a symbol of Ginger's deepest fears. "Do you recognize her?" Clark asked gently. Ginger shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "She looks to be in some type of dental uniform, maybe a dental assistant," Clark continued, his voice neutral. "She then gets in his vehicle. Looks like he's looking at a CD of some sort, conversing back and forth, listening to music." The scene played on, the mundane details making the eventual betrayal even more jarring. A short time later, Clark said, his voice dropping slightly, "I see them kissing." The moment the image appeared on the screen, a gut-wrenching sound escaped Ginger's lips. It was a sob, strangled and raw. "Oh my God," she gasped, her body convulsing with the force of her grief. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The visual confirmation, the undeniable proof, was a physical blow. It was one thing to suspect, to imagine. It was another thing entirely to see it, to witness the man she loved, the father of her child, kissing another woman with such casual intimacy. Clark immediately paused the video. He moved to her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's all right," he murmured, his words a gentle mantra against the storm of her emotions. For a few moments, the only sound in the room was Ginger's weeping. The first crack in the dam had appeared, and the emotional flood was just beginning. He waited until her sobs began to subside before speaking again. "Let's just finish the rest of this really quickly," he said, "so we can go get them." The last 3 words hung in the air, a promise of action, a shift from passive observation to active confrontation. He restarted the video, moving to the footage from day 9. On this day, we have him once again outside of his workplace, getting in his vehicle, arriving at the dentist office. This time, the footage showed Jack parking in a more secluded spot. "It looks like he almost parks in a hidden space," Clark noted, "because if you notice, he's just sitting in his car, and that same female walks out, gets in her vehicle." Ginger watched, her grief now hardening into a cold anger. "So this has been going on for some time," she stated, her voice flat and brittle. But what's strange, Clark continued, is he actually follows her to this local bar. He watches her actually go into the bar, and a short time later goes in after. The bizarre performance from day 11 began to unfold on the screen. Now, I don't know if they're playing some game, Clark admitted, but as you can see, she's actually sitting at the bar by herself. He's over there at the jukebox. Ginger watched the strange, detached dance, her confusion palpable. He walks over to sit at the bar, right next to her, and she doesn't even acknowledge him. The camera caught a small, almost imperceptible gesture. He did some kind of thumbs up towards her, Clark pointed out. I don't know what that was about. The scene in the bar continued to play out, the tension building with each passing moment. And then sometime later she comes back, sits next to him, gives him a kiss, Clark narrated, as the brief moment of affection was captured. It looks like he turns around, gets up. They leave together. The footage then cut to the parking lot, the scene that had so disturbed the investigators. They're kind of pushing each other, shoving each other up against what looks like to be her vehicle, Clark described, his voice carefully neutral. Ginger's reaction was visceral. This is disgusting, she spat, her eyes narrowed with contempt. This is disgusting. The footage became more explicit. And then he opens up the driver's side door, with his hand on her lower back, pushes her into the passenger seat. They drive away to a very secluded area. Clark paused the video for a moment, preparing her for what was next. Ginger, what you're about to see is very graphic. She simply nodded, her jaw tight. He pressed play. The final piece of footage was from a camera with a powerful night vision lens, capturing the scene in a ghostly green and black. Jack's car was parked on a deserted access road. Inside the vehicle, the two figures were a tangle of limbs. And they're then seen. It looks like she's disrobing herself, Clark said, his voice barely above a whisper. The camera zoomed in, catching a glimpse of a tattoo on the woman's lower back as she moved. Ginger's voice was a sudden, sharp explosion of disgust. "Oh my gosh," she exclaimed. "No wonder they call those tramp stamps." The final moments of the video were undeniable, a graphic depiction of a sexual act. Ginger could not watch anymore. "Oh my God," she cried out, turning away from the screen, another wave of sobs shaking her body. Clark stopped the video. The evidence had been presented. The truth was out. The room was thick with the wreckage of a shattered marriage. But through her tears, a new resolve was forming in Ginger's eyes. The pain was transforming into a fierce, righteous anger. She was no longer just a victim. She was a woman who had been wronged, and she was ready to fight back. The time for tears was ending. The time for confrontation was here. The transition from heartbreak to rage is a powerful and often unpredictable alchemy of the human spirit. For Ginger Franklin, sitting in that sterile viewing room, the transformation was swift and absolute. The graphic images on the screen had acted as a final, brutal catalyst, burning away the last vestiges of doubt and sorrow, leaving behind the hard, unyielding core of her anger. The woman who had entered the room filled with anxious trepidation was gone, replaced by someone with a new and dangerous clarity. She wiped the tears from her face, not with a delicate dab of a grieving wife, but with a fierce, determined swipe of her hand. Her breathing, once ragged with sobs, now steadied into a slow, controlled rhythm. The storm of emotion had passed, and in its wake was a chilling, focused calm. She looked at Clark, her eyes no longer pleading for comfort, but demanding action. Clark, an experienced reader of human emotion, recognized the shift immediately. He had seen it countless times before. It was the moment the victim found their strength, the moment the balance of power began to tilt. "Our detectives know where they are," he said, his voice now taking on a more strategic, operational tone. He was no longer a counselor. He was a field commander preparing for engagement. "I can call and find out their exact location right now." He paused, letting the reality of the next step settle in. He looked directly at Ginger, his question both a confirmation and a challenge. "Are you ready to go bust them?" Ginger's reply was instantaneous, devoid of any hesitation. A single, explosive syllable that contained all of her pain, her anger, and her resolve. "Hell yeah," she said, her voice low and steady, laced with an intensity that left no room for argument. The decision was made. The confrontation was imminent. Clark pulled out his phone, the familiar motions of his job taking over. "Yo man, what's going on?" He spoke into the receiver, the coded, clipped language of his profession, a stark contrast to the raw emotion that filled the room. He listened for a moment, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, absorbing the tactical details from his team in the field. "All right, copy that. Thanks. We'll be there soon." "All right, bye." He ended the call and turned back to Ginger, the final piece of intelligence now in his possession. "So I just got word that they're actually right on the other side of this building," he informed her, a new urgency in his voice. The proximity was a shocking, almost unbelievable coincidence. The entire affair, the secret meetings, the lies, had all been orbiting this one central location. "This is the actual dental office," he clarified. The confrontation would not happen in a neutral, anonymous location. It would happen on their territory, in the very place where the betrayal had been born and nurtured. And the timing was even more surreal. He's about to undergo a procedure right now as we speak. The irony was staggering. Jack was literally in the dental chair, the supposed reason for his secrecy and strange behavior, but the procedure he was about to undergo was not the one he was expecting. "His procedure?" Ginger repeated, the words dripping with a bitter, sarcastic venom. A humorless smile touched her lips. Yeah, let's go bust him." There was no more discussion needed. Ginger stood up, her body language radiating a purpose that was both terrifying and righteous. She was a woman on a mission, fueled by the adrenaline of betrayal and the promise of a long overdue reckoning. "Okay," Clark said, recognizing her readiness. "Follow me." The team mobilized quickly, the quiet, somber atmosphere of the viewing room replaced by the focused energy of a unit moving toward a target. They moved through the corridors of the office building, their footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. As they rounded the final corner, Clark pointed ahead. "There they are right there," he whispered. There, go, go, go." The time for stealth was over. The time for shock and awe had begun. "Let's go, 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 go," Ginger echoed, her whisper a guttural hiss. And then they were running. A chaotic, determined surge of people, the camera crew struggling to keep pace, the handheld footage becoming a jarring, visceral blur of motion. They burst through the doors of the dental office, the sudden intrusion, a violent disruption of the sterile, quiet environment. And there he was. Jack Franklin, reclining in a dental chair, a paper bib tucked under his chin, his mouth wide open. Misty was beside him, her professional demeanor, a fragile mask that was about to be shattered. The first sound to break the stunned silence was Ginger's voice, a raw, primal scream of rage. "You ass!" She shrieked, the rest of the word lost in a torrent of unfiltered fury. "You mother!" The dental instruments clattered to the floor as Misty jumped back, her face a mask of confusion and fear. Jack struggled to sit up, his eyes wide with disbelief, the dental dam still in his mouth making his words a garbled mess. "What's going on?" he mumbled, his voice a pathetic echo of the confident man from the surveillance videos. Ginger was a tempest, a force of nature unleashed. She lunged towards him, her hands outstretched, a security guard moving quickly to intercept her. "You mother!" She screamed again, her voice cracking with the sheer force of her emotion. Jack, finally removing the equipment from his mouth, found his voice. "What's going? What the... His confusion was giving way to a dawning, horrified realization. The two separate worlds he had so carefully maintained had just collided with the force of a head-on crash. He looked from his wife's enraged face to the camera lens now inches from his own, and the reality of the situation finally sank in. This was not a random jealous outburst. This was an organized, documented, and very public ambush. Misty, trying to assert some semblance of control, stepped forward. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice attempting a tone of professional authority that was completely undermined by the chaos erupting around her. But Ginger's focus was not on her husband anymore. It was locked onto the woman who had been his accomplice. She turned her fury on Misty, her question, a direct, venomous accusation. "Are you my husband?" The sentence was left hanging, the missing verb a silent, damning indictment that everyone in the room understood. The confrontation had begun. The lies had been exposed. And in the wreckage of that dental office, amidst the scattered tools and the stunned faces of the staff, 3 lives were about to be irrevocably and publicly dismantled. The quiet whispers of doubt had finally become a deafening public roar of truth. The immediate aftermath of the initial explosion was a chaotic ballet of accusation and denial. The dental office, once a place of quiet, sterile procedure, had become a theater of raw, unfiltered human drama. Jack, now fully upright in the dental chair, struggled to regain his composure, his mind reeling from the shock. Misty, caught between her professional responsibilities and her role in this domestic disaster, seemed to shrink under the glare of the cameras and Ginger's incandescent rage. "What?" she stammered, attempting to feign ignorance. "This is my work." "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about." The word ma'am was a desperate attempt to create a professional distance, to reframe the encounter as a misunderstanding with an unstable stranger, but Ginger was not having it. Oh, she mocked, her voice dripping with scorn. "You stupid mother," she yelled, the insult sharp and brutal. "And you, what the, were you, tramp?" The word hung in the air, a public branding. Clark, the host, stepped into the fray, his role shifting from passive observer to active interrogator. He addressed Jack directly, his tone calm but firm, cutting through the emotional chaos. "Hey Jack, I got a question for you, man." Jack, looking for any possible escape, seized on a physical ailment. "I just had a tooth extracted," he mumbled, as if the dental procedure could somehow excuse the moral one. Ginger's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Yeah, but you had some other things extracted too," she shot back, her wit as sharp as her pain. Clark pressed on, ignoring Jack's diversion. "Jack, I gotta get a couple of answers from you, man." "We busted you, Jack. We busted you." The phrase was simple, direct, and undeniable. He then posed the central question, the question that hung over the entire sordid affair. Why do you cheat on your wife of 6 years? Denial is the first refuge of the guilty. Faced with the undeniable evidence of his own betrayal, Jack's immediate response was a flat, unconvincing lie. "I didn't do anything," he said, his eyes darting between his wife and the camera. Clark's incredulity was evident. "You didn't do anything?" he repeated. "No, I didn't do anything," Jack insisted, his voice lacking any real conviction. "I don't know what you guys are talking about." Ginger, who had just spent the last hour watching a highlight reel of his infidelity, could not contain her outrage. "Oh yeah," she challenged. "I didn't do anything, Ginger," he said, turning to her now, attempting to gaslight her in the midst of the very evidence that proved his guilt. "Why are you freaking out on me?" "I didn't do anything." Her response was a cry of pure exasperation. "Do you know why I'm freaking out on you? Because—" She was cut off by Clark, who decided it was time to introduce the hard evidence into the confrontation. "If you didn't do anything, man, then who's this woman that you're with?" he asked, holding up a tablet with a still image from the surveillance video clearly displayed on the screen. The photograph showed Jack and Misty in an intimate embrace. It was undeniable. It was him. "There's proof," Ginger said, her voice a low growl. Jack glanced at the screen, his face a mixture of panic and defiance. And then, he delivered a lie so audacious, so patently false, that it stunned the room into a momentary silence. "That's not me," he said. Clark was momentarily taken aback by the sheer brazenness of the denial. "That's not you?" he asked, just to be sure he had heard correctly. "No," Jack repeated. "In that Mazda right there, that's not you?" Clark pressed, pointing to the car in the picture, the same car parked just outside. "I don't know what you think you saw," Jack said, his denial becoming more desperate. Ginger's voice cut through his lie, her words a vivid and damning detail from the video. "I saw," she declared, her voice rising, "I saw that whore. I saw a tramp stamp on the back. I saw it." Her words struck a chord. Misty, who had been trying to remain in the background, visibly flinched. The accusation was now directed at her. "Nothing happened," Jack insisted, his voice a frantic mantra. A dental assistant, witnessing the escalating chaos, tried to intervene. "Ma'am, he just had his tooth taken out, please." But Ginger was relentless. She turned her attention to Misty, her eyes burning with the prosecutor's intensity. "You got something on your back?" she demanded. Misty, cornered and exposed, could only offer a weak denial. "No." Ginger's laugh was triumphant and cruel. "Yeah. That's what I thought," she sneered. "That's what I thought. I saw it. You were in the car." Misty fell back on her rehearsed ignorance. "This is my workplace. I don't know what you're talking about." Ginger's reply was swift and cutting. Yeah. But you do a lot of work, don't you? After hours. Realizing that the battle for Jack's reputation was lost, Ginger turned to the practicalities of the future, her words a declaration of war. You know what? We're done, she announced, her voice cold and final. We're done. I'm taking every single thing. Child support. I'm taking everything from you. Clark, still holding the tablet, made one last attempt to break through Jack's wall of denial. He showed him another picture, this one from inside the bar. You're telling me that this isn't you at this bar right here? With her? That's not you sitting at the bar? Jack looked at the image of himself, clear as day, sitting next to Misty. His response was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. It looks like me, he admitted, but it's not me. The absurdity of his statement hung in the air, a testament to the desperate lengths a person will go to avoid facing the consequences of their own actions. I didn't do anything, he repeated, the lie now sounding hollow even to himself. Ginger had heard enough. Whatever, she said, turning her back on him. I don't believe you. I don't even want to see you ever again. The initial phase of the confrontation was over. The denials had been made, the evidence presented, and the lines of battle for the future had been drawn. But the strangest and most disturbing revelations were yet to come. As the initial shockwave of the confrontation began to recede, it left behind a fractured landscape of broken trust and desperate justifications. Jack's strategy of complete denial had crumbled under the weight of the visual evidence. Realizing his absolute denials were no longer tenable, he shifted to a new tactic, minimizing the transgression. His wife's last words, "I don't even want to see you ever again," seemed to finally penetrate his defenses, not with remorse, but with a panicked realization of his impending loss. "Ginger, nothing happened," he pleaded, his voice now laced with a desperate, unconvincing sincerity. This soft admission, this shift from "it wasn't me" to "nothing happened," was a crack in his armor, and Clark, the host, immediately zeroed in on it. He turned his attention from Jack to Misty, seeking to exploit the division between the two accomplices. "I need your side of the story," he said to her, his tone inviting a confession. "Hey, do you have any idea that he has been married for 6 years?" Misty, who had been trying to fade into the background, was now thrust back into the spotlight. Cornered, she opted for the safest possible answer, a shield of complete ignorance. "I have no idea what's going on," she claimed, her eyes avoiding everyone. "You have no idea whatsoever?" Clark pressed, his skepticism clear. "No idea," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. His final question to her was designed to expose the lie of her professional detachment. "So you've never seen this woman come into the dentist office with him to get a procedure done?" he asked, gesturing toward Ginger. Before Misty could answer, Ginger's voice cut through the air, sharp and decisive. She was done with the games, done with the lies. She was now focused on the cold, hard logistics of separation. "I'm taking Jackson, and I'm leaving tonight," she announced to Jack, her voice unwavering. "And I'm going to my parents' house." This declaration of intent sparked a new kind of panic in Jack. The loss of his wife was one thing, the loss of his son was another. "You're not taking him anywhere," he retorted, his voice rising with a possessive anger. "Why would you do that?" Ginger's response was a torrent of righteous fury. "Of course I am," she yelled. "Why would I do that? Because that's my child. I'm the one involved. You're the one cheating. You ruined this marriage. You ruined this marriage." Her words hung in the charged atmosphere, a final, damning verdict. The focus then shifted back to the strange role-playing game at the bar. Clark, holding up the tablet again, addressed both Jack and Misty. "Do you remember this night? Do you recall? It seemed like you guys were playing some sort of game. What I have right here is you two sitting at the bar together." Faced with this specific, undeniable moment, Jack's facade of nothing happened finally broke completely. He let out a sigh of exasperation, a partial admission finally escaping his lips. "We went out to have some drinks," he conceded. "It was nothing." But Clark was not interested in the what, he was interested in the why. The bizarre behavior at the bar hinted at a deeper, more troubling dynamic. "My question for you is," he said, directing his query to Misty, "why did you guys play like you didn't even know each other when you sat together at the bar? Was that like some type of role-play thing, or—" Misty hesitated for a fraction of a second, a quick, calculating glance at Jack, before she threw him under the bus. That was his idea, she said, her voice quiet but firm. She had chosen her side, and it was the side of self-preservation. This small betrayal, this shifting of blame, seemed to wound Jack more than Ginger's rage. He looked at Misty with an expression of disbelief. At the same time, Ginger, hearing the term role play, saw a sliver of a possibility, a desperate hope that this was all some strange, misguided attempt to spice up their life that she had misunderstood. "Jack, if you were honest with me," she began, her voice softening for the first time. But Jack, feeling the pressure from all sides, cut her off. "Nothing happened," he repeated, the lie now a pathetic, reflexive shield. "Nothing happened." Ginger's frustration boiled over. "No, if you were honest with me," she pleaded, but Jack was physically recoiling from the emotional intensity, groaning in frustration. "Jesus Christ, Ginger," he finally exploded, his voice a mixture of anger and self-pity. "Look, we had drinks a couple of times, so what?" This admission, wrung from him after an hour of lies, felt like a hollow victory. Clark, however, sensed there was more to the story. The role-playing, the aggression in the parking lot, it all pointed to something darker. He decided to take a different approach, to interview Misty privately, away from the prying eyes of Jack and Ginger. He led her a few feet away, creating a small pocket of temporary confidence. There, under the hum of the dental equipment, she revealed the final, shocking piece of the puzzle. When Clark returned to the group, his expression was grave. He walked directly to Jack, his purpose clear. "So what I just got from her side of the story," he began, his voice low and serious, "is you have a fetish for rape. Is that true?" The question landed like a physical blow. The air crackled with a new, horrifying tension. Jack's response was not a denial. It was a defiant, almost proud confirmation. "You got it right," he said, a sneer on his face. He then turned and shoved Clark, a sudden act of physical aggression born from his complete and total exposure. "Hey, don't push me, man," Clark warned, holding his ground. "Do not push me." Ginger, hearing the accusation, was reeling, trying to process this new, monstrous information about the man she had married. "Fetish for rape?" she repeated, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. Jack, now completely cornered, became a caged animal. "You guys are." "Up, man," he snarled, his rage directed at the camera crew, at Clark, at the world that had dared to expose his secrets. "I've got to go." "I've got to go," he muttered, trying to push his way out. Clark blocked his path, his final questions demanding to be answered. "I just want to know why you're denying the fact that you just cheated on your wife of 6 years. You have a son named Jackson and a relationship, man." Jack had no answer. He simply looked at his wife with a vacant expression. Ginger, in a moment of bitter irony, turned to Misty. "You're just going to let him do this to you, right?" she asked. A strange, fleeting moment of solidarity between the two women who had been deceived by the same man. But the moment passed. The damage was too deep. The betrayals too profound. The conversation devolved into a final, pathetic round of blame and self-pity. "Like if she was to give you another chance with your relationship," Clark asked Jack, testing for any sign of remorse, "would you be willing to continue with Ginger and for your son?" Jack's answer was a testament to his shattered moral compass. "Maybe," he mumbled, shrugging. "Maybe. I don't know." The word maybe was the final nail in the coffin. It was an insult more profound than any of his lies. "Not even for your son's sake?" Clark pressed. "I don't know," Jack repeated. Ginger, who had been listening to this exchange with a look of stunned disbelief, finally found her voice. She would not allow him the dignity of making a choice. "Well, I'll make the decision for you," she declared, her voice ringing with a cold, absolute finality. "It's a no. It's a hell no." Jack, in a last-ditch, pathetic attempt to regain control, feigned a desire for reconciliation. "Maybe we can work it out," he offered. But it was too late. The revelation of the rape fetish was the one detail Ginger could not ignore. "He has an obsession?" she asked Clark, needing to hear it again. According to her, Clark confirmed. She said that he has a rape fetish. And that's why they were sitting at the bar and ignoring each other. Jack, in a final act of cowardice, tried to shift the blame one last time. That was her idea, he claimed. That was all her idea. But it didn't matter anymore. Ginger's world had been completely upended. "Great," she said, her voice hollow. "Great. I don't even know who I married. I saw him having sex with another woman on camera, willingly." Jack's final defense was to attack her, to blame her for his infidelity. "You never give it to me," he accused, his voice venomous, "so I have to get it from somebody." The cruelty of his statement, delivered in front of a camera crew and the woman he had cheated with, was breathtaking. "You've been gone for so long," Ginger shot back, the details of their private life now public fodder. The argument dissolved into incoherent, bitter exchanges. A ring was mentioned, a symbol of a commitment that had been rendered meaningless. He made a move to leave, a final, desperate escape. "So you have to watch your backs, guys," Clark warned his crew. "He's backing out fast. Heads up, heads up, heads up." The sound of a car engine roaring to life filled the air as Jack sped away from the scene of his public disgrace, leaving behind the wreckage of his marriage, his family, and his reputation. As the taillights of his car disappeared down the street, Ginger's final words were not a plea for him to stay, but a curse and a command. "Jack!" she screamed into the empty night, her voice raw with pain and liberation. "Jack, don't come home! Don't come back!" The confrontation was over. The truth, in all its ugly, twisted detail, was finally out in the open. All that remained was the long, arduous task of rebuilding a life from the ashes. The aftermath of a storm is often a landscape of profound and unsettling stillness. The wind, the rain, the violent energy all recede, leaving behind a world that is fundamentally altered. Debris is scattered where solid structures once stood. The familiar has been rendered unrecognizable. For Ginger Franklin, the moments following Jack's frantic departure from the dental office parking lot were exactly that, a quiet, surreal landscape of emotional wreckage. The adrenaline that had fueled her rage and her righteous indignation began to drain away, replaced by a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. The camera lights, which had felt like weapons of justice only moments before, now seemed intrusive, their glare too harsh for the raw, exposed wounds of her reality. She stood on the pavement, surrounded by the crew and the curious onlookers from the dental office, yet she had never felt more alone. The man who had been the central pillar of her adult life, the co-author of her family's story, had not only betrayed her but had revealed himself to be a stranger, a man with dark and twisted appetites she could never have imagined. The confrontation, as necessary as it had been, had not brought closure. It had brought a horrifying clarity, and with that clarity came the daunting, terrifying task of starting over. In the days and weeks that followed, Ginger's journey was not one of dramatic recovery, but of quiet, determined rebuilding. The decision to file for divorce was not a moment of agonizing indecision, but a simple, logical next step, as obvious and necessary as boarding up a window after a hurricane. There was no room for forgiveness, no space for reconciliation. The betrayal had not been a simple lapse in judgment. It had been a fundamental violation of trust, compounded by a level of psychological manipulation and a disturbing sexual deviance that made any thought of a future together impossible. How could she ever again sleep next to a man whose secret desires revolved around a fetish for sexual violence? How could she look her son in the eye and pretend that their family was whole, that his father was the man she had promised Jackson he was? The answer was simple: she could not. She told the producers, in a follow-up interview, that her husband's actions were not just an affair, they were, in her words, just foul. The disgust in her voice was absolute. For Ginger, taking him back would not be an act of grace, it would be an act of self-annihilation. It would be a betrayal of her own dignity, and more importantly, a betrayal of the safe and honest world she was determined to build for her son. Jack Franklin, for his part, found himself adrift in a world of his own making. Stripped of the carefully constructed facade of the family man, he was left with only the ugly truth of his actions. According to his later statements, the public exposure, as humiliating as it was, also served as a strange and twisted form of liberation. He no longer had to maintain the exhausting charade of his double life. He admitted that he had an odd fetish, but he framed it not as a moral failing but as a matter of compatibility. He informed the producers that Ginger simply was not the woman he truly wanted, a cruel but perhaps honest assessment from a man incapable of deeper introspection. He cast his affair with Misty not as a betrayal of his marriage vows, but as a search for a partner who could participate in his specific dark fantasies. In his own mind, he was not the villain of the story, he was simply a man with unique needs that his wife could not, or would not meet. His relationship with Misty continued, at least for a time. He claimed that while she might not be the perfect woman, she was, for the moment, perfect for me. It was a relationship born not of love or respect, but of a shared transactional deviance, a fragile bond forged in the fires of a public scandal. He had traded his family for a fetish, his future for a fleeting and dangerous thrill. Misty's perspective remained that of a willing accomplice, seemingly unfazed by the moral implications of her actions. She admitted to the producers that, aside from the chaos and humiliation of the confrontation itself, she had enjoyed her fling. There was no indication of remorse for the family she had helped to shatter, no sense of guilt for the pain she had caused. For her, the affair seemed to be an adventure, a walk on the wild side that had unfortunately ended in a messy public spectacle. Her primary concern was not for the lives she had disrupted, but for the inconvenience it had caused her. This lack of empathy, this casual disregard for the consequences of her choices, painted a portrait of a person as morally adrift as Jack himself. They were, in their own destructive way, a perfect match. Two people navigating the world with a compass that pointed only toward their own immediate gratification, regardless of who was left in their wake. Theirs was a cautionary tale of how easily a secret, shared between two consenting adults, can become a weapon of mass destruction when it is wielded without conscience or care for the collateral damage. The story of Ginger and Jack Franklin is more than just a lurid tale of infidelity. It is a profound exploration of the nature of identity and the terrifying reality that the people we believe we know best can harbor secret worlds we never dreamed existed. It speaks to the slow erosion of trust that begins with the smallest of lies, a change in underwear, a new cologne, a secret dentist appointment. These are the subtle tremors that precede the earthquake, the small cracks that appear in the foundation long before the entire structure collapses. The narrative serves as a stark reminder that a marriage is not a static institution, but a living, breathing entity that requires constant nourishment in the form of honesty, communication, and mutual respect. When those elements are withdrawn, when secrets are allowed to fester and grow in the darkness, the entity sickens and, eventually, dies. Jack's bizarre role-playing and his disturbing fetish add another layer to this cautionary tale. It highlights a world where fantasy and reality can become dangerously blurred, where the pursuit of a personal thrill can lead to the complete abdication of personal responsibility. His need to construct an elaborate theatrical production around his affair was not just about hiding the truth from his wife, it was about hiding from the truth of himself. By casting himself in the role of a dominant, aggressive stranger, he could escape the mundane reality of being a husband and father, a man bound by vows and obligations. It was a pathetic and ultimately destructive form of escapism, one that cost him everything he claimed to hold dear. The public confrontation, therefore, was not just an exposure of his actions, it was the violent stripping away of his costumes, forcing him to stand on the stage of his own life as he truly was, a weak, deceitful man who had sacrificed his family at the altar of his own selfish and sordid desires. Ultimately, the resolution of this story lies not in the continued drama of Jack and Misty's toxic entanglement, but in the quiet resilience of Ginger Franklin. She emerged from the wreckage not unscathed, but unbroken. She chose the difficult path of truth over the comfortable illusion of a lie. She chose to face the pain head-on, to endure the public humiliation of the confrontation, in order to build a new life for herself and her son on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. Her story is a testament to the strength that can be found in the face of profound betrayal. It is a reminder that while we cannot always control the actions of others, we can control our response to them. We can choose to remain victims of our circumstances, or we can choose to become the architects of our own recovery. Ginger chose the latter. She took the scattered pieces of her shattered life and began the slow, arduous process of putting them back together, not as they were, but as they were meant to be, whole, honest, and free. Her journey forward would be a quiet one, far from the glare of the television cameras, but it would be a journey of true and lasting courage.